In Westerville, Ohio, a seemingly ordinary Saturday afternoon took an unexpected turn for Emmanuel Allawal, a well-known civil rights attorney. As the day unfolded, he found himself at the center of a situation that left him questioning the fine line between vigilance and profiling. It all began when he stepped out of his office to dispose of some trash. Now the air was still and the town was calm, but the peace was soon interrupted by the arrival of two police officers. Now the officers responded to a call approached them with suspicion. Now they believed that they were investigating a potential case of illegal dumping. Emmanuel, ever the professional, handed over his business card and driver's license, showing that he was a man with nothing to hide. But as one of the officers began to record his ID, the situation took a turn that made him incredibly uneasy. He felt the intrusion was unnecessary and action across the line. The officers, however, continued their process, seemingly unfazed by his discomfort. To Emmanuel, the moment represented more than just a routine check-in. It was a moment where vigilance blurred into something more invasive, something that echoed the deeper societal issues that he dedicated his life to challenging and overcoming. The officers left, the interaction over, but the weight of the encounter lingered in his mind. He knew that the justification for their initial approach had merit, but the subsequent actions left him with a sense of unease. This incident continued to weigh heavily on his mind in the days that followed. It wasn't just about the brief interaction with the officers. It was about what that interaction represented. To him, it felt like a reflection of a much deeper issue, one that went beyond that single moment and tied into a lifetime of experiences as a black man in America. When he shared his thoughts with others, he didn't mince his words. The encounter, though brief, carried the heavy weight of history. "I believe that was racial profiling," he later confided to a friend. To them, the word of a black man doesn't really matter, whether he's an attorney or not. It was a sobering realization that in that moment, his identity seemed to overshadow his profession, reducing him to just another person to be verified, scrutinized, and doubted. The next day, Westerville's police department found itself under a spotlight. The incident had reached the ears of local news and questions was being asked. The police, aware of the sensitivity of the situation, began their review. Now they acknowledged that they was looking into the matter, and by the next day, Chief Charles Chandler stepped forward with a response. Now he spoke carefully, aware of the tension simmering beneath the surface. He noted that the entire interaction had lasted less than 3 minutes, a blink in time compared to the long shadow that it cast. He pointed out that Emmanuel had offered his identification willingly. Now, it wasn't something that the officers had demanded. Yet in his explanation, Chandler focused on procedure. He emphasized the importance of thoroughness in every encounter, noting that officers were expected to gather as much information as possible to ensure their actions were justified, legal, and professional. But for Allawal, his response felt hollow. Procedure, no matter how well-intentioned, didn't erase the discomfort that he had felt, nor did it address the underlying issue of trust or the lack thereof. To him, the encounter was less about the facts and more about the perception, the lived reality of being treated differently because of the color of his skin. It was a reminder that even in a professional capacity, he wasn't immune to the biases that still prevailed throughout society. As the body camera footage started to spread, Emmanuel watched with a feeling of resignation. The footage taken by the two officers, Dan Ruth and Matthew Bowman, showed moments that had since become much more important. The clips, though edited to hide the details of his driver's license, clearly showed one thing: the unease that he felt as the officers did their checks. In the video, Officer Ruth took his business card and gave the license to Officer Bowman, who was still learning the job. The process was routine, almost mechanical. But to Emmanuel, it felt like an unnecessary check, a doubt about his identity just because of his skin color. He had no issue with showing his ID. He understood the need for officers to confirm identities, especially when there was a concern about illegal activity. But when Ruth handed his driver's license to Bowman and the officer walked towards the police car, his unease grew. It was a simple act, yet it carried with it the weight of countless experiences, both his own and those of others who looked like him. It was the moment that solidified his belief that this was more than just a routine check. It was a matter of trust, or rather, a lack thereof. For Emmanuel, the situation was no longer about the officer's intentions. It was about the message being sent that despite his credentials, despite his clear and calm demeanor, his word wasn't enough. The decision to run his ID through the system was a choice, one that seemed to stem from a deep-seated doubt. The release of the footage brought the incident into the public eye, sparking conversations in the community. Some viewed the officer's actions as thorough, a necessary step to ensure that everything was above board. Others saw it as an example of the subtle yet pervasive ways in which racial bias can manifest in everyday interactions. Chief Chandler's explanation did little to quiet the unease. Now, he pointed out that Officer Ruth was training Officer Bowman, suggesting that perhaps this was a case of the veteran officer teaching the rookie the importance of procedure. But Emmanuel knew that this went beyond training. It was about the layers of doubt that seemed to cling to him simply because of the color of his skin. He reflected on the incident, and he realized that it was part of a larger narrative, one that spoke to the experiences of many black men and women who navigate a world that often sees them through a lens of suspicion. The interaction, though it was brief, was a reminder that the fight for equality and fair treatment is far from over. In the days that followed, he remained resolute. He had spoken out not just for himself, but for those who might not have the platform to do so. The footage, while meant to clarify, only deepened his resolve. Now, this wasn't just about a moment captured on camera. It was about the countless moments that weren't, the ones that happened in silence, unnoticed by the rest of the world. When Officer Bowman finally gave him his driver's license back, he felt a small sense of relief. But it didn't last long. He could tell that even though the situation seemed over, it wasn't really finished. The conversation had been polite, but there was an unspoken tension underneath. It was a clash between the world that Emmanuel believed in, a world where the law protects the innocent, and the reality that he often faced, where his innocence was doubted just because of who he was. He went on with his tasks, throwing away the trash in his office dumpster, trying to feel normal again. But as he worked, his mind kept replaying the interaction. The officers had seemed polite, but their insistence on checking his ID and their lingering doubts just bothered him. It wasn't just about that one moment. It was about all the times that he and others like him had been made to feel like their word just wasn't enough. The officers returned to their car, leaving Emmanuel to finish his task. From where he stood, he could see their silhouettes through the tinted windows, a reminder that his presence had drawn more attention than it should have. Inside the car, Officer Ruth quietly told Bowman to look up his information once they was out of sight. To Ruth, it seemed like the right thing to do. But to Emmanuel, it would have felt like a betrayal if he had known. As the cruiser drove away, he stood by the dumpster, lost in thought. Now, he didn't know that they were planning to look him up later, but he could sense that this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was a part of a bigger issue, one where trust was fragile and hard to find. As he returned to his office, he decided to keep moving forward. He knew that this wouldn't be the last time that he faced such a situation, but he knew that he wouldn't give up. In the days that followed, he couldn't stop thinking about what happened. He shared his experience on social media, noting that the officer's initial inquiry was appropriate, but he still felt that something wasn't right. He decided not to file a formal complaint with the police, but his words showed a quiet unease. Chief Charles Chandler, after reviewing the situation, stood by his officers. To him, the body camera footage showed nothing wrong. The officers had acted within their duties and followed the expectations of the Westerville Police Department. For Chandler, it was just a routine check that was handled professionally. As the footage spread and the story gained attention, others began to share their opinions. Professor Dan Cabil, a respected constitutional law expert at Capital University's law school, thought about the situation. He had known Emmanuel as a student and had seen him grow into a lawyer who understood the law deeply. Coble recognized that the officers had the legit right to record his name and check his license if they felt like it was necessary. The law allowed these actions, especially when there might be uncertainty or suspicion. But he also noticed the subtle difference between what was legal and what was necessary. Once the officers confirmed that he was just throwing away trash at his own office, he believed the encounter should have been over. As the story gained attention, people began discussing not just what happened, but what it meant on a larger scale. Some argued that Olawale's rights had been violated, saying the officers overstepped by continuing to ask for information even after the situation was clear. Others believed that the officers were just doing their job, making sure that they didn't miss any details in their investigation. But before I kick into our next story, I want to know what you think about this situation. Make sure you sound off in the comments below and don't get anywhere, because we got another one coming up. Our next story takes place in a warm evening in Florida, the kind of evening where the air feels thick and the sun casts long shadows across the city. A state attorney by the name of Aramis Ayala had just finished teaching a law class in Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, a place where she felt at home, surrounded by students eager to learn and inspired by her achievements. It was a good day, one where she could see the impact of her work in the faces of those that she taught. As she left the university, she made her way to her car. Now the campus was quiet, the hustle of the students slowly fading as the night began to settle in. She got into her white sedan, the familiarity of the routine comforting as she started the engine and pulled into the road. Now she drove, something caught her eye, flashing lights in her rearview mirror, bright and urgent. A police vehicle, unmarked but clearly official, was following her. Now the lights flashed insistently. Her heart began to race. She knew the routine. This many stories of traffic stops that became something more. But she stayed calm, her mind clear, as she pulled over to the side of the road. The scene felt like it was happening in slow motion. The police car stopped behind her, and Ayala watched as one of the officers got out and walked toward her car. She remained calm, her hands steady on the wheel, her breathing controlled. She knew who she was, a state attorney, the top prosecutor in the district. But she also knew what it meant to be a black woman in America, especially in moments like this one. The officer stood outside her window, formal and commanding. The moment was brief, just under 3 minutes, but it felt much longer, stretched by the significance of what it represented. As the encounter ended, she took the slip of paper from the officer, with the names of the 2 officers hurriedly written on it. The night air was warm, but the way the situation had unfolded left a chill, an unease that stayed with her as she watched the officers walk back to his car. The red and blue lights kept flashing, casting quick shadows on the quiet street, a sharp contrast to the calm that she had felt just moments before. She sat in her car, holding the piece of paper, her mind going over what had just happened. The officer had given a simple explanation, just a routine check, running her license plate, and a dark tint on her windows. But underneath it all, she felt the heaviness of the moment, with hints of something more significant. It wasn't just about the rules. It was a reminder of the challenges that she faced as a black woman, even though she was a state attorney. She started her car, and as she drove away, she kept on thinking about the interaction. The officer had said it was unusual for a license plate not to be registered. Still, she felt that this stop was more than just a technical issue. It seemed to highlight the ongoing scrutiny that she faced, not because of her job, but because of who she was. The drive home felt unusually long, with only a few cars on the empty streets. Now when she got to her driveway, she thought about the irony. She had spent the day teaching students about the law and sharing her knowledge, only to be reminded that despite her position and her skills, she was still affected by social biases too. The next morning in Florida, the video of the traffic stop began to spread quickly. Now, it was less than 3 minutes long, but carried the weight of many similar incidents across the country. Activists, journalists, and ordinary people shared the video, each adding their own thoughts and views on what had happened. For some, it was a clear case of racial profiling, showing how a routine check could be affected by hidden biases. For others, it highlighted the ongoing problems in the system that even a high-profile person like the state attorney couldn't avoid. She saw the story spread, with people talking about the video and raising the concerns that she had been quietly feeling since the night before. The paper with the officer's name stayed on her desk, reminding her of both the encounter and of its wider significance. And as the video spread on social media, it quickly became a hot topic in the national discussion about race and justice. Well-known figures shared it, their reactions reflecting a long-standing frustration. Activist D. Ray McKesson, with his nearly 860,000 followers, asked, what was the reason for the stop? Now, his tweet was brief but impactful, sparking thousands of responses and retweets as people tried to understand why the stop had happened in the first place. Sean King, known for his strong stance against racial injustice, joined in. Now, his tweet sharply criticized the Orlando police for not providing a reasonable explanation for stopping Florida's only black state attorney. King's message highlighted the deep mistrust between law enforcement and minority communities. His followers, many of whom had similar experiences, used the comments to share their own stories and to find solidarity. Political commentator Keith Bacon also spoke out, highlighting the unfairness of the situation. Ayala, who had done nothing wrong, was scrutinized simply for being in a place where her presence was questioned. Bacon's tweet resonated with many who saw Ayala's experiences as a reflection of their own, where authorities could use even minor reasons to control people. The support and anger from these prominent figures brought renewed attention to Ayala, who was already known for her strong stance on the death penalty. As a state attorney for Orange Osceola, she had faced both praise and criticism for her decision to stop pursuing the death penalty in her cases. The decision had marked her as a reformer willing to challenge the norm, and it was this bravery that now inspired people to stand up for her. As public attention grew, the Orlando Police Department issued a statement about the video, and they said the footage had been made public through a routine records request, which unintentionally brought the incident to light. The statement repeated what the officers had told Ayala during the stop. The license plate did not match any vehicle, and the dark window tint made it hard to see inside. The department stressed that checking license plates was a normal part of their patrol duties, presenting the incident as a routine procedure. However, many felt that this explanation was inadequate. The video, seen by hundreds of thousands of people, showed more than just a traffic stop. The dark window tint and the unregistered plate might have explained the stop on their own, but when considering her identity, the situation seemed a little bit more significant. In the days after the video came out, the discussion grew with commentators and activists examining every detail. Was this just an example of overly aggressive policing, or did it highlight deeper issues in law enforcement? Was she targeted because of her race, or was it just a routine stop that became a big deal because of the viral video? For Ayala, the experience showed the ongoing challenges that she faced, not only as a state attorney, but also as a black woman in power. She had spent her career working for justice and trying to reform a system that often seemed unfair to people like her. But being pulled over on the side of the road reminded her that the struggle was still very much alive. The video quickly became a symbol of the longer fight for racial equality and justice in America. And even though it was just a brief interaction, it carried the weight of years of similar, unrecorded, and unresolved encounters. As the initial anger died down, Ayala kept on working, unaffected by the incident, as she knew her position gave her a platform to drive change. While the traffic stop was just one part of a bigger story, it was a reminder of the importance of her work and a long journey ahead of her in the quest for real justice. So what are your thoughts on these stories and what they represent? Make sure you let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch y'all in the next video.